Welcome back to another episode of Unscripted, the go-to podcast for those flipping the script and taking the unexpected path. I'm your host, Jessica Vergio, holistic life and business coach, author, speaker, and self-proclaimed high-energy hype girl. Each week, I'm bringing you inside. No gatekeeping here. I'll touch on proven holistic business strategies, powerful mindset shifts that have led my clients through massive transformation, and no BS conversation with industry leaders designed to help you get out of your own way to actively pursue a life of purpose. If you're ready to ditch the limitations at the door, hit follow and get ready to be activated to step boldly towards your big goals. Now let's dive in. Guys, welcome back to the show. I'm so excited to introduce you to today's guest. My boy, Matt Gottesman, is back on the show for another juicy conversation around a few of our favorite topics, podcasting and creating consistency in your life. Hello, yes. We really dropped in on the emphasis to have a clear vision and a passion for the topics that you want to be talking about on your podcast. Matt dove into how he's created an ecosystem for his podcast. Now this is the second one. And we really just talked about and explored like the different ways to monetize a podcast, including sponsorships, promoting your products and services, creating paid content. Again, the distribution for your podcast is one of the biggest things that I think we talked about for a hot second on where you're hosting the platform and what you're doing with the show and why you have the show. We also talked about the power of consistency, and it's why we both attest to having the growth that we've had with our podcast, creating a schedule and a system to produce really good content on the regular. Matt is one of those people that I just connect with on such a soul level, and I feel like you will as well. If you haven't started following Matt Gottesman, go to mattgottesman.com and Matt Gottesman on Instagram. Check him out. As always, Matt and I are encouraging you to follow the show, leave a rating and review for this episode. If you have any ahas or takeaways, tag us, share us on social media, and let us know what it was that you took away from this episode, because there's so many juicy nuggets that I know you're going to want to dive into. So buckle up. I hope you're out enjoying your walk, in the car for a drive, or just tapping in with us for a hot second to learn a few different ways that Matt's become so successful in the online space and taking his second podcast to, I don't even know where he's at with downloads, but over 100,000 for sure at this point. And he just got started. So you're going to want to drop into this episode for sure if you've been curious about starting a podcast or growing bigger online. Now let's dive in. Welcome back to Unscripted, the podcast. It's your girl, Jess, with one of my most favorite humans, to be honest, on the planet. His name is Matt. And Matt has been someone in my life that's become a mentor, a teacher, a guide. He is a fellow projector, so we vibe a lot in that energy. Matt has been on the show before, but I'm bringing him back today because we've got some topics we want to dig into around a few things that have been coming up for both of us in business, in life, in conversations with our clients, and just in the journey of podcasting. We've been able to learn a lot about ourselves and a lot about how other people operate. So we're going to dive into some juicy, fun topics. Matt, welcome back to the show. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you for having me back, Jess. I'm so good.
All right, drop in with the guest just a second on your background and who you are.
Matt Gottesman, thank you for having me here. Thank you to your community listening. I have a podcast called The Niche Is You and a newsletter, The Niche Is You. I've been a digital native 20 plus years. When I say native, meaning like just been on the digital landscape since really its almost inception in terms of society using it. And that was a lot of my background in helping other businesses take more of what they do in the physical world into a digital one, so the rest of the world that's trying to find them can. Started about 10 years ago, started doing that more for myself. I've been a writer secretly for like 25, 30 years, and then publicly the last 10. So I'm finally writing my first book after writing online to the world through the newsletter and through social and all those things. I love playing at the intersection of spirituality, creativity, business, because they're all integrated. As you see me say in my content a lot, we're all artists, we're all creatives, and we're all entrepreneurs, even if you don't know it. A lot of people sometimes will say, no, I'm not. I'm like, any discipline that you do requires you to do something that didn't previously exist, and then you made it exist, and you had to use some type of skill to make that happen. And so I like reminding people of that within themselves. So podcast and newsletter, Niche Is You, everybody check it out. Work with some pretty incredible private clients and brands. So that's the short version. Yeah. With the second podcast, I knew what I wanted for sure. Absolutely. The vision very clear. And I urge anybody listening, you don't have to know all the how components and the time or some of the variables that we as humans often need to know. I think you have to have the vision and then start moving and everything starts to come together. This time around, for context sake, I had a digital agency. I've been in and around marketing, growth marketing, publishing, content, media, you name it, ads, affiliate, like everything that is done with the internet the last like 25, 30 years. I've been around it all. I knew that in this next season of my life, I wanted to create an ecosystem around the things that were part of my mission, part of my own purpose, if you will. And I knew that a lot of that dealt with media, publishing, and apparel. You don't have to understand it. And that's one of the messages I want to, because people are like, apparel, really? I'm like, yeah, apparel, really. And it came through. I was having a really great conversation with God and I was feeling into it. And I wanted a medium to which I can bring my art and writing forward and have the essence of those words be ingrained into like the fashion and apparel that others could also embody the message as well for themselves too, and bring notice to other artists around the world. If you look at it from a physical sense, people automatically be like, whoa, that's big, that's too much, that's overwhelming. It's like, no, don't think about it like that. That's where the human in us, I think, gets in the way. I knew that I wanted to do that at some point, and I knew that when it was time, it would be time. So going back to the beginning and to answer your question from that standpoint, it was like, I knew that in creating an ecosystem, I wanted a way in which I create content, I write, and I speak. And this is a very important point. I did a post on this. Brian Tracy talked about very profound sales and marketing and mindset and all this stuff. Brian Tracy said, I want you to write down everything you want to do, everything, all of it, all the things that you do, period. He goes, if you could do one of those things all day, every day, what would it be? Then do it for the second thing, do it for the third thing. Those three things will tell you everything you need to know. And it's very true because then you can actually build your world, your ecosystem, your passion, your vision, whatever around those things. And I love writing and speaking. So podcasting and writing online, writing a newsletter, writing on social media, writing books, like I want to do those things. And can you commit to those? And the thing is that why I was so strategic the second time around is because I also knew I wanted my own distribution because I don't need a market to tell me whether I'm good enough or not, which is also part of my brand. It's great to be featured on amazing podcasts like yours, which I'll do over and over again. I didn't want to have to wait for anybody's approval. And I think that's a beautiful place to be in because then you're curating your own community, your own group of individuals to have at a very grassroots level where you get to just say, hey, here's some things I want to talk about. Anybody else want to talk about them? Which I've always had, but I just started applying the gas and the fire to the growth marketing side of it. So going into this time, I knew that there were going to be several things I wanted to do with this podcast, including bringing awareness to a lot of really key topics for every individual for themselves. The Niche Is You is about you and removing the complex nature that the external constantly says, here's your constraints. It's like, let's make better ones. And then I knew that I would have the distribution to also say like, I can bring awareness to other podcasts, other products, other things, or my own that I think that I would love to create and bring to the world as well too. So I was very strategic in this, but at the same time, I wanted to have a personal conversation every single morning with my audience and grow it from there. And I've done that. The first year was about 100,000 downloads. Now I'm averaging about 12 to 15,000 downloads a month. It continues to keep going up. So a lot of what we've talked about in the growth side is working. I've made some tweaks to it. And so it's growing even more.
That's amazing. When you talk about distribution, are you referring to the format of like not having guests on the show?
Actually, it's funny you bring that up because I am wanting to start bringing on potentially at least one guest a week. So when I talk about distribution, when you think about, we live in this really beautiful time where you can increase, as Naval would say, like the surface area of your luck simply by creating content and kind of talking to the world. And I think a lot of times people are worried about, I don't know who I'm talking to. I was like, what resonates with you? And talk to the world as if you're talking to one person. And you can do it on whatever platform feels most appropriate for you. And in this day and age, we can have multiple mediums, multiple platforms. So if I am talking to people through a podcast and I've got 50,000 subscribers there, or 50,000 folks that have come through there and 15,000 downloads a month, like that's a distribution point. If I have 10,000 people a week that receive my newsletter, that's a distribution point. If every time I do a post on social media, I'm hitting 10, 20, 30% of my audience, that's a distribution point. And so the more the distribution points we have, the greater the impact from our work. I also urge everybody not to grow for the sake of just growing for popularity, growing for numbers, growing for validation, growing for all the reasons that people usually want to grow, but for the sake of quality and connection and community. You could do a lot more with a lot less size than for the sake of just being really grandiose and big. So what happens when you have quality and you have connection and community, and then you start to scale from there? And that's a beautiful thing. And so I want to show that model to the world, like what's possible when you have like your own distribution. Really, distribution is basically saying like, hey, I have my own group of people I get to talk about these things to and bring awareness to these things to, or bring products and services to that I feel will resonate with them. And if they don't, I want them in some way to get any kind of value from being in this ecosystem.
Yeah. And when we talk about distribution too, obviously Instagram is not a platform that we own. It's a place where we can distribute our content, but things like podcasts and obviously your email list is yours to work and own however you choose. But having yourself everywhere is obviously the best way to go about it. So you put yourself almost everywhere. And when you talk about quality, you're also leaving out the quantity of episodes. Most people do not put out as much content as you do, my friend. Let's talk about that for a second, because I do think that's a differentiating point between the growth that you've had versus someone who's just struggling to get one episode out a week. I actually just had a conversation with a new friend of mine who started a podcast probably about maybe 6 months ago. For the sake of wanting to learn about entrepreneurship, he decided, I'm going to go start a podcast asking other entrepreneurs how they got started, what they're doing. So it was like twofold. One, it was a great way to get out into the world to meet other people you wouldn't otherwise get an hour of their time. And then two, it was a way for him to create content that would position him as the facilitator of these conversations. And we were in conversation the other day about introductions, him wanting introductions to other entrepreneurs. And he just mentioned how he struggles to create solo content because he's not sure what he wants to be showing up and talking about. And I referred to you in your daily podcast. I said, you can fall somewhere in between not knowing what to say and then creating content every day that feels like inspiring based off of the things you're interested in. So you always showcase, just like I do, about reading and then getting inspired and having a conversation with a friend or a family member and then bringing that subject to the podcast and just ideate on it, having a conversation about it, whether you are going one way or another. And I think there's something to be said about people who don't want to take a position. And I don't see that to be true for you. I feel like you take in content and then you create conversation around something that resonates with you. So how does one create as much content as you do? Is it because you just love writing and learning?
I think it's a combination of things. Find what you want to create or talk about, or your interests, or are your natural curiosities, or are your passions, or are just things that keep coming into your purview, are just constantly there. Then, like a muscle, start slowly and then get into a rhythm of it so you can produce faster. We have time. We have a lot of time, actually. And we know we have time. You and I talked about when you do like a time audit and you find out like how much time any of us could be wasting. When we know something we'd want to create and we have less time to think, we're in more movement. So when I first started this podcast, it was like, oh no, I'm going to do 2 days a week. And I got into a rhythm of it, of this is great. I love doing this. And I also know that I want to grow. And so it's like, if I love to do this and I want to grow, I'll do more of it. Like a very simplistic way of looking at it is like Steph Curry or Kobe Bryant, they loved what they did. Well, Bryant past tense and Steph Curry present, but they love shooting the ball. They love basketball. So it's like they will go to the gym over and over. Steph Curry shoots thousands and thousands and thousands of shots in practice for a fraction of that in the real game. But he loves it and he'll do it every single day. There's always a lot of that talk around, oh, if you only wait till you love to do something in the passion. I'm like, no. It's a lot of work, but it's different work. I love podcasting, I love writing, and I love communication and speaking. If you look at those two things, I don't have to wait for a publisher or for someone to come along and say, hey, we accept you, like now start publishing. I don't need a stage to come calling and say, hey, would you speak on the stage? And I do speak on some stages. We live in an age of abundance where you don't have to wait for producing the things that you want to do, but you do have the responsibility of figuring out what are some things that you wouldn't mind creating, getting in the ring and establishing a pace. And then you could speed it up at a rate without sacrificing, because you don't want to burn out either. Like you and I were also very systemized. I actually have never produced this much that I'm producing now in less time than ever. So there's a few things in there. One, repetition will eventually make it so that way you can do substantially more in less time. Two, I started thinking about how I'm using my time, and I'll say, okay, like on Sundays, I'll do 3 episodes. On Wednesdays, I'll do 2 for the next 2 days. And I love it. Like I love sitting down and like pushing record. I've gotten to the point where, and I have for a while, but it's funny, I'll show people just the headline, just the title. And they're like, where are the notes? I'm like, there are no notes. They're like, you just push record? I'm like, I just push record. You get to a point of producing within your thing, whatever those things are, because it becomes very second nature. It's the reps, it's the repetitions. And then writing, for example, it's very simple. Every morning between 5:30 and 7:30, Monday through Friday, is designated creativity time. A lot of the stuff that I put up writing wise is either in the moment, right then and there, that I came up with from just having creative hour, or sometimes I'll repurpose old content because I want to go deeper on those topics. Earlier, we never want to do more for the sake of more, less but better. How do you take the things that you really love and the things that you really want to do and do them better and more efficiently, and having good constraints that create more creativity and more weight and efficiency to how you do something? It's like this freestyling meets constraints at the same time. I know it boggles people because they're like, how? And I'm like, again, everything is a practice. But when we just start throwing things out there and iterating from there and seeing what works for us and what doesn't, there's freedom in that. Nobody's telling us what we should or shouldn't do, but there's also responsibility in that.
I'm thinking of the people who are in that phase of their life or their business where they feel like a podcast might be what's next for them, or might be the thing they should, quote unquote, do in order to market their business better, or to go deeper, or to potentially monetize in the future. And I've had a lot of people come into our world, especially when we had the agency for a while, who felt like a podcast was the next right thing to do, or maybe it was creatively something they felt passionate about doing, but there was some resistance. They weren't quite clear. They didn't have the vision like you talk about, and they didn't know how to leverage the podcast or grow it. And things like time and ideas on creating the content were the struggle piece of it. And so can we speak to anybody listening who potentially feels like a podcast is next for them, is the thing they really want to do, but they're not quite sure where to start? I know you're great with frameworks and putting things into boxes, if you will, around who should maybe and who shouldn't start a podcast, at least right now in their phase of life or business.
I'll say this to everybody listening that's debating, you're already podcasting, you just haven't pushed record.
I love that.
You're already podcasting. You're already at restaurants and cafes, or hanging out with certain friends, or at your job, or within your entrepreneurial endeavor, or whatever it is, talking about multiple things you love to talk about, or helping others who come to you for those things. The difference is now, can you push record? And the constraints sometimes are well, I don't know all that goes into a podcast. I don't know like how to get it online. It's like anything. And you didn't know how to do those things within your work. You didn't know how to ride a bicycle at one point. There's always a constraint. It's the mind that's messing with us. That's often saying, well, it's information you don't know yet. If you can push past the information you don't know yet, and especially for the reward of now talking more about the things that you love to talk about, only to a substantially larger audience, so you're helping that many more people, think about the impact that has. So everybody's already podcasting. It's just whether or not they haven't pushed record yet. And then whether they seek out people like you or I, or YouTube. There's obviously levels to the game, of course. Frameworks, I think, are great, more so once you're in the game, because we don't want to overthink getting in the game and saying, I have to do these things. We want to get in the game and then say, what things do I need to do? And that's how I've even optimized my own writing, my own podcast. I never thought I would do 5 days a week. Are you kidding me? And it's funny because it feels like so fluid. I never thought I would do 5. I remember when 3 was like, are you kidding me? I remember when I suggested to you, I'm like, hey, you should do more. And at first, when we think about it, like, wait, what? No, there's no time. after a while, it just starts flowing. Anybody worried about what are all the things to make it happen, spend a Saturday, 1 or 2 or 3 hours, just looking up the items you need, or just reach out to one of us. Just like, here's a quick checklist. And then spend time just jumping in the way you would going into your garden. And you're like, okay, what soil do I need? What plants do I want to put in there? And how do I want to design it?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think we're in a world of overthinking, and that's what you and I were chatting about before we hit record around trying to do less but better. And I think if you're trying to squeeze things into your maybe already busy life, you actually did a great podcast this morning talking about time and how that's generally most people's excuse. And it was mine for the longest time, and money. I knew I didn't want to edit my own show, and I knew that at the time I was really busy. And it wasn't until COVID gifted us with an abundance of time and I actually had some resources saved that I could sit down and start my show. And at that point, I didn't have a clear vision. It was really just getting in the game like Matt talked about, and I figured it out from there. But if I hadn't been gifted that time, I probably would not have created it. And looking back, it's been the best decision I've made because of the relationships that I've built, the ability to have conversations with just about anybody I want at this point now will come on the show and give me an hour of their undivided attention. And for that, it's changed my life in so many ways because you're right. I already was talking a podcast, 5 or 6 of them a day with my clients behind the chair. And I actually just had Jake Kelfer on the show. He has a book called From Idea to Bestseller, and he helps people write their book. And he said the same thing about book writing. And I'm sure you as a writer can attest to this, as we've already spoke books on books in our lives. And if you can get up and talk for an hour or 2, you've got half a book written already. If you can sit down and talk about a topic that you're passionate about or that you're already a partial expert in, or even just a few steps ahead of somebody else in, you could write a book. And so for anybody who feels like, I'm not a great writer, or I'm not super good at interviewing, or I can't quite put my sentences together, the only way to get good at something, like Matt talked about not being able to ride a bike until you could, you got to put your reps in. And when I first started podcasting, I doubt it was great. I don't even want to go back and listen to those episodes. Nobody has to, which is the greatest thing, but it's content that lives on forever. And again, the distribution is ours that we own here on these platforms. And going back and looking at content that landed with people, what's going on, I think that's the biggest pushback I get from anyone who's gone through the podcast course that I have, or who has even come to me ever for podcasting, is around like creating enough solo content. But trust me when I say, once they get into a flow, it's like there's no stopping them. They've got endless amounts of things they know they can talk about. That gift that we really all have is conversation and talking about how we feel about things. We all can express ourselves. It's just a matter of perfecting it. Study your tape, watch your episodes back if you do video, listen to yourself back, and pick up on things that you like or you don't like. Were you able to land the plane? What does it look like when it comes to creating content? And it's like putting out stuff on social media. Did it land with anybody? Is it getting the response you're hoping for? Is it not getting a response? You can't be throwing one episode out a month and think your podcast is going to grow. How many people do we know put podcasts out in 20 episodes and they're like, this isn't doing very well. No one's downloading. No one knows about the show. Here we are. I just hit 300 and I'm like 4 years later, there's a flow to it. But I think like with anything good, if you think about putting in a couple of years of time, it takes a while to become really good at something, or to feel really confident and comfortable, or to create that full vision like you had in the beginning. And the only way to get there is to start taking action and do it. So you're right. Removing the limitations of what you think something should be like and just hitting record. I did that before I even knew how to set up all the equipment. I just got on GarageBand and started recording. And I was like, yep, don't like that, like that. Oh, if I wanted to do video, I got to fix the lighting. So you start to figure things out. And this is coming from a hairdresser who didn't have to do any sort of tech whatsoever and was not in the world of marketing for 25, 30 years on the online space. If anything, I was the exact opposite of Matt. So you've got two vastly different backgrounds of people who have been able to figure it out. But the main point of all of that, I think, is the consistency that we've brought to the table with it. Even my downloads aren't incomparable to yours. I'm still a top 1.5% podcaster due to the level of consistency that I've shown up by putting 2 episodes at minimum out a week for 3.5 years. And it was funny, Scott got me a trophy that said, congratulations on 300 episodes. And he had printed out stats on podcasters of like how many there are, how many people don't make it past episode 3, how many people don't make it past producing 10 episodes. So it was wild to me how many people potentially had a dream of starting a podcast and being a content creator in this form, and then they stopped.
Okay, let's talk about surface area of luck and consistency. I think it was Jesse Itzler who said that of the millions and millions of podcasts that are out there, it was some crazy number. He's like, only 10% of them, so now we're in the hundreds of thousands, actually had done like 10 episodes. He goes, of that percentage, only so many numbers have actually done more than 50 episodes and actually have a full on show. The number I think came out to like 80,000 total podcasts in the world. You want to talk about increasing the surface area of luck? Be consistent in something that a small fraction of people do that has the world as an audience versus competing for billions of people on a social media platform. And then there was one other thing I want to pin drop about. I get why I think there's sometimes hesitancy to doing some of these things. It was the month before, out of nowhere, I had a surge, a spike that happened. And it was because Spotify ended up promoting an episode. And actually, there's another one again this month. It's not as much as that one, but they're promoting. I don't know if it's because it picked up enough traction or it's the consistency that I'm driving a certain amount of traffic every single day to Spotify, which I believe that's probably what's happening. Even if it's not like any drastic number, I'm not putting up like Joe Rogan numbers yet. But the fact of the matter is that if they're seeing a consistent number every single day, that's a signal to a tech platform. Interesting. And so there was a huge spike where I was getting like thousands a day of downloads and it was coming from Spotify. And now I noticed another episode this month that started to do it again. Not as many a day, it's like hundreds a day, but I'm like, I'll take it. That's hundreds of downloads. There's this consistency from that. I'm talking about like two different things too here. I'm talking about growing something that I love. And some people say, oh, well, you're naturally a writer, naturally a podcaster. And here's the thing. I want to expand someone's idea around that. I think what's happened is I don't play in the group of people who said, I have to do a podcast and I have to do social media to grow. It's part of my mission. And it's a very distinctly different thing because what happens is I don't want to be in the department of overthinking. What I mean by it is like somebody says, oh, well, I hear everybody does a podcast, so I have to do one for my brand. No, it should be more like, these are things that are very important to me and I believe can bring a lot more awareness. And it's not completely philanthropic. That's not what I'm saying. If it's tied more to like something internal, you're going to produce it differently and keep going, then expect results within 5, 10, 20 episodes or 20 posts on social media or whatever, and then be like, okay, this doesn't work. What's not working is the approach. If it's a mission, you're like, oh, okay. For example, I love how I write and I love how I was doing content. But at one point when it felt like I wasn't getting enough traction, I still had the humility to be like, oh, I'd like to go learn what other creators are doing in their delivery of the things that are important to them. I did, and I learned. I was like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool what they're doing with their content. I can do that too. I want to try that particular delivery mechanism, delivery style with what I want to talk about because I'm on a mission. So now growth is this byproduct of wanting to like be better at something that you love, then growth as a byproduct of, I need to grow a podcast for marketing for this. It becomes very rigid. It becomes very burnt out, very overwhelmed. And I totally get it. You can get burnt out from your own mission too, out of the frustration of wanting to grow something that you're very passionate about. But those are two very different paths. One feels very like overwhelmed from, I have to do this thing versus I get to do this thing. They're two very different approaches. So over here, the only frustration I'll have is if I want to grow something I'm very much in alignment with versus wanting to grow something you're not in alignment with. Oh God, like it's so much easier to quit or say it doesn't work or give the coach or the agency or whoever it is that you're getting help from to be like, oh, that doesn't work. No, it does work. Now we're just talking, are you a Kobe and Steph Curry or are you even a basketball player? Do you want to play basketball? Or was hockey your thing and you're just like avoiding it? And I think once we distinguish what we know is more in alignment, and then we're applying these mechanisms, podcasting, writing, newsletters, digital, of course, an apparel line, whatever it is, a candle line, a farm. I'm talking about all these things online now. You're seeing these accounts that are talking about farming in their backyards, and they now have millions of followers because they just wanted to talk about farming, but they just pushed record. And they're like, hey, I was like, so I'm learning about this about my plants. And here's what happened with it. And by the way, the reason why plants have always been such a big thing for me is because blah, 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 blah. And they're like, thank you for being on my journey. And then they're teaching others like, oh my God, that really worked. Thank you so much. I tried it too. And now we're all contributing our value from our gifts.
You talked about that this morning on the episode that you did around the things that you love, the things you love to do. You gave an example of somebody who asked that question. And that is the thing I think it is hard to be discerning sometimes when you see everybody doing XYZ. Let's just use podcasting as an example to think you need to do that as well. But if ultimately it's not what you really want to be doing, those are the people who end up quitting because you're starting a podcast just to start a podcast. And there isn't a passion behind it in the sense of it doesn't have to be your full purpose in life. Now you have to get passionate about creating content in the sense that, hey, the way I'm doing it's good, but it's probably not the best. Let me go out and see how other creators are making stuff. And that's your great example of that and have helped me with that. Look to people who are doing things or taking it up a notch, or how are they growing as fast as they're growing? What are they doing that's a little bit different that I could change and adapt and maybe mirror some of what they're doing to get those results that I see them getting? And ultimately, that's all part of business and growth. And if you stay the same, you're going to be trended out by the latest and greatest. And that comes with the territory of creating content, of not staying stagnant, not doing the same thing that's quote unquote easy. I genuinely am a very nosy person, which is why I have a podcast. I've always been good at asking questions. It was a skill set as a kid that wasn't looked at as something good, right? You're nosy, you ask too many questions, but it served me well as a hairdresser. And it served me well. Like you said, I already was quote unquote podcasting with my clients, talking about life, talking about what was going on. And so when it came time to start the podcast, I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm going to be really good at this. And though the vision for what the podcast could do for my life and business wasn't fully there yet, the passion for creating conversation and to learn, that's my favorite thing. I love learning the insides of how things work, what makes people's minds work a certain way, asking those questions of like, yeah, but how did you push through? So for me, that's all I needed to know, was I was going to like that part of it. What then came of it was the details and how to get started, and not having a tech background and not having a marketing background. You can learn all of that. There's people like us now who can teach some of that stuff. And that's what I did. I went out and found mentors and coaches. Matt and I have worked together and studied his work. And you just get around people who are playing the game at the level you want to be playing at. And that's key, and why both of us love coaching programs and putting on workshops and doing different things. And ultimately, when I started the agency and did the podcast stuff, it was from a passion of really wanting to help people get unstuck and take action to finally start, because I knew what it was like to be in that, like, I don't know how to do it, so therefore I'm not going to do the thing I'm really interested in doing. That bicycle example is a perfect one. Most people don't know how to do something until they learn how to do it. And so if this is your sign or permission that you needed to hear this episode today around, maybe it's not even starting a podcast, maybe it's something else in your world that you've been playing small and pretending I don't know how to do that, so therefore I'm not going to do it. Or I'm maybe just going to toe dip in something and try it a couple of times. And if it doesn't work out, then I'm just not going to do it anymore. I think those days are gone. I think everything is so saturated in the sense that if you are not willing to be consistent and put some skin in the game for a while, you might as well not start. And that's why my opt-in that I have, my freebie even, it's just a download of 3 reasons to start a podcast and 1 reason not to. And the only reason not to, I'll give it away right now, is if you can't find some sense of consistency in creating the content. Now, with everything, you can take breaks. There can be seasons. You can do 5 episodes a week like Matt. You can do 1 or 2 a week like I have. It's just a matter of what you want to come out of it, right? How fast do you want to grow, and how serious do you want to take something? I think between our work together, I've learned that in different seasons, like, we're able to do different amounts of things. And so for me right now, with Kai being a pre-teenager and traveling back and forth like I do, 2 episodes feels really good for me. There's a lot of ease in that. I can sit down and create those episodes. Sometimes I get batched ahead and think, oh, I can put 3 or 4 out this week. And I just check myself, and it works for me right now. But I can't wait for the season where I can sit down and do more episodes, more solo episodes, because I think I'm at a place now where that would feel really aligned for me. But it took me a couple of years. And so that's one of the cool things about this platform, is it's always a different iteration of where you're at in your business and your life, which is why I think neither of us will ever run out of content to share.
Yeah, I'll push my own boundaries in a very subtle way. Just like when you're saying, hey, sometimes I'll get ahead and I'll have extra episodes. I'm like, oh, I could push out more this week. That's actually how I got here. I was like, yeah, all right, I'll throw an extra day this week just to try it. And then I was like, yeah, it wasn't so bad. Next week, I'm like, I guess I do 3 now. For the longest time, I had the most random. It was Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. People were like, why not Wednesday? I'm like, I have no idea. I actually don't know. I'm like, a day of rest, maybe? I'm like, I'll get there. Now it's like, let's do this. That just started a few weeks ago. We build up a pace from also sometimes just the most random nature of like, well, I do have an extra one, so let me try that. When you were talking, I was also thinking about curiosity and humility are 2 superpowers that are always working in your favor. We don't need to know how we're going to do these things. And I think that we're always thinking that we do. None of us do. We figured it out. Like you're saying, it wasn't even your background, but you figured it out. You're living proof of that. I've talked about this before and people are like, oh, how'd you get good at video? I'm like, I'm not. I still laugh because I'm looking across into the kitchen area and I'm thinking about like, people ask like about the video when I do the videos, like with me and the blackboard, which became a thing for a while. And people were like, oh, like what tripod, what equipment? I was like, I use a paper towel rack. And they're like, a paper towel rack? I was like, yeah. I was like, I use this paper towel rack over there. I just like the angle from standing it up there. I have a tripod, but I'm like, I like the paper towel rack. They're like, that's the secret. I'm like, that's the secret. There you go. And they're like, which iPhone, what equipment are you using? I'm like, oh, my iPhone. They're like, oh, the 14, the 15. I'm like, a 12 Pro. I have some of the newer equipment, including like my new MacBook. You just need to try things and experiment. A really great hack to think about is when you see people out there, like I will watch people teaching Instagram on Instagram. That doesn't mean because that's what got them big, you need to create the same content and teach Instagram. And I'm saying this because this is a really good mental hack, because I think sometimes people go, oh, that must be the thing. No. Watch what they're teaching you about using the platform and then use it for the things that you want to talk about, grow, and build. There's your fast hack right there. That's what I did. I wasn't necessarily watching marketers, quote unquote, or like your gurus. I was watching the creators are like, hey, here's a cool thing I experimented and found. Here's what I just did. You can use it too. And then I would apply that to my own messaging, my own topics, my own products and services, my own whatever, right? And I think that's really reassuring about how much access we have to information, but also because I think sometimes people say, oh, this person, they grew, but they teach this. I don't want to teach that. I'm like, no, they're teaching you how to use the tool for the thing that you want to expand on. And that also takes a lot of pressure away too. And I think that's why it's like, you're not necessarily looking to people to educate you to feel like that's what you're going to become. You're looking to get the education to how you can apply it in real time. I think that is such a key distinction. We see this often. You and I've seen this too a lot, like where you see how people are doing things and you can almost get caught up in like, oh, am I then going to do the same thing? And it's like, no, you're going to use the technique to bring your thing forward. I think it's a very fast tracking thing to do, because that's exactly what I did for some of my stuff in seeing how to get better at this stuff. So creativity and humility. I didn't know how to do certain things. So I saw what other people were really effective at and what they were teaching. And then I did that using my own creativity to bring the things I wanted to forward. You could do that for a fraction of the cost, if not for free, compared to like what school is not teaching. And they did not teach me any of these things. We're in such an abundant time. I have to keep saying it because I get like, it can feel overwhelming too. A lot of information, a lot of things flying our way. We're also in a very responsible time. We have to be responsible with what comes in. We have to be responsible of how we manage our time. And we have to be responsible in that we want to be more producers and consumers so we can be responsible in what goes out. And welcome to abundance and responsibility at the same time.
I love that. Okay, let's ask the question about the elephant in the room, because the majority of people that come to me about podcasting, the first or second question is, how quickly can I monetize the podcast? Or how can you monetize a podcast? I know my answer. I would love to hear your answer if you were asked this question.
You can monetize as soon as you want, because you're bringing your voice forward. You're doing all the marketing. You're doing all the distribution. You're doing anything and everything. Even if you have a small audience, it's still quality people. This really comes down to every single individual's path and like what they want to achieve with it. For example, I haven't monetized mine yet, and I can. However, I don't want to monetize for the sake of money. I want to monetize for the sake of good business, good understanding of audience, good understanding of my distribution and integrity and all those other things. Meaning like I'm coming up to this where I want to bring a lot of awareness to other people and their brands and what they're doing that are specifically helpful to my audience, because they're growing as I am too, and they're wanting a lot of the same things that I use or that I have access to or that are part of my world. So I feel like there's a lot of alignment in doing that and bringing awareness from a sponsorship standpoint. The other side of the monetization is I can promote my own products and services, which I'm a huge fan of. And I do get sales from for apparel or for my creator studio workshop that I've created. There's so many different ways to monetize, and you can go as early as you want, very early on, and get even like local people in your own market who don't know how to do any of that stuff. So the fact that you're bringing a voice to their brand immediately Other people, they'll pay to be on someone's podcast to bring more awareness to what they're doing with their products and services. Here's a really cool technique. I think what you could really do is, instead of just talking about how amazing the product or service is, I think you could actually talk about like the science and the creativity and the intuition and all the things. And you can go into the details. If it were me, if a person came on, I wouldn't want to necessarily talk about the brand, but like, how did this happen? And like, why is it benefiting so many people? And what exactly has it been solving? And just the intricacies of how something creative was birthed and ended up helping people in some way. And then I feel like that brings more context to other people. Wow, like I know exactly why this person did it. And that sounds like good. I want to try it. I think it just depends on every single person. And then now there's even another way where you can payment gateways some of the content for just your people, where it's like, hey, listen, every day I talk about these things. However, additional episodes, I want to talk about just these things for the part of the audience that wants help with just these things. That's actually paid content that the subscribers have access to, because that's specifically the creators in my group who are wanting to know, can you teach me how to do all this stuff like at scale? I've actually thought about that. I would actually consider doing a Monday, Wednesday version. Mondays are always free. First Wednesday of the month is always free, but the last 3 Mondays are actually like gated content, because people are just like, how'd you do it? And I like that concept of like, you know what? Let me just show like one thing at a time. Like, here's how I did it. Here's how you do it. Here's where you implement it. Here's how you track it. I like that part because it's like a form of teaching in a way.
I love that. My simple answer to somebody is similar to yours is, do you have something to sell? And if you have a podcast and you have something to sell, that's where you should market it. And choosing to sell your own products and services on your own show is probably the best way to grow and to build an audience that trusts you and to connect with. But if you have nothing to sell and you never plan to have anything to sell, you can use the podcast as a way to connect with other brands that align with whatever it is you talk about to support that. And you could never have to create anything to sell. Just have to be putting out good content consistently and then aligning with brands that make sense for you, right? Because we're always talking about the things we love on social. We're always talking about and sharing things with people that we love, but you can bring that into your business of podcasting and monetize that way. I feel like that's the number one question over how do I edit my show? I get, how do I monetize the show? And I'm always blown away when people don't have anything to sell, yet they want to monetize the show from the beginning. But I will speak to leveraging your social media in regards to that, just to put a bow on podcasting. If you are new to social media, you have very little downloads, very little content out there already. If you have a pretty good social media, you can leverage your social media along with your brand new podcast to other companies in order to share. Not only will you talk about them on the podcast, you can talk about them on social media in order to create a little bit of revenue, so you can pay for this with that and use your different platforms like that. Now, if you have a huge social media, I've had people who I know who are pretty big names who had over a couple 100,000 up to 1 million followers really leverage social media because they knew that they could grow the podcast off of the social media platform they'd already built. So depending on where you're at, anything is possible. It's just a matter of what direction you want to take things and how consistent you're going to be able to show up and be. But I love how you spoke about staying curious and staying humble in this game, because every conversation always humbles me a little bit. And because I'm so curious, I think it keeps me in the game. So I love those two. And I hadn't thought about it that way, but I do love that perspective. You're always dropping the perspective shifts for me, Matt. I love that about you. So thank you for coming on and just giving us a little insight to what you've built and how you've grown things. And just a reminder to anybody listening, if you want to learn more about podcasting, you've got great resources out there. Yes, there's YouTube. Yes, there's social media, and there's so many other platforms, but there are people like Matt and I who love to help you dive deeper into the world of podcasting. It's really, I think, changed both of our lives for the better. It's allowed us to connect deeper and with so many other people, but to learn more about ourselves too. I think some of the biggest takeaways and aha moments I've had are listening to some of my content back and thinking, I really needed to hear that today. I'm so glad I spoke about it. Or it's a way for me to process what I'm thinking in content that hopefully can help other people. And so when you keep it small, and like you say, you show up and you talk to maybe that one person in your head, knowing that this episode doesn't have to land with everybody, but hopefully it can help 1 or 2 people and move the needle in their day. That keeps me going. I don't know about you.
I will say too, it's constantly allowing me to push my own boundaries. Again, the human in us gets in this way of, well, I don't know where it's all going. I know you don't know where it's all going yet. And that's a beautiful place to be. I've understood more now about the journey over the destination because of being in the game and because of constantly pushing my own boundaries. And that's why it's like, we can monetize anything. We can build anything. We can do anything we want. Should we is a different question. Whatever season you're having, what is making sense and what is in alignment. And then also the patience to just keep going and keep seeing how you would do things differently. And so in this new paradigm, if you will, that we're living in, I like this idea of just because I can doesn't mean I should, but if I am going to, how would I do it differently? That's the contrast that's really been helpful for me. And then on top of that, like where I say push the boundaries is because there were certain things I didn't even know were possible until two different concepts come together. Some of these I had the foresight to see. So I created my text list. And at that time, I really didn't think, okay, am I going to have apparel? It was more so for, well, I'm going to have a book in a couple of years. It'd be nice to actually also just send podcast episodes through. And then all of a sudden you figure out like, oh, wow, there's a lot of diehards that have the phone number, but also want the moment something comes out within your apparel. And I'm like, ooh, pair those two together. So I find along the way, you end up pairing things that you wouldn't have like naturally thought about. And your audience will also deliver information along the way that you also hadn't thought about. And some people were like, hey, I would do like a subscription if each month you just launch new stuff and automatically I want a subscription and I just get whatever's in that collection each month. And I'm like, I hadn't thought about that. So it's pushing your own boundaries that you didn't even really know about until all of a sudden new information is being revealed to you. And isn't that beautiful about life? New information always being revealed to you and your ability to adapt and figure out how to do a next level version of you.
I love that. That is brilliant. And you're right about getting feedback from people and the ideas and opportunities that come just by putting yourself out there, putting content out there and just seeing the evolution of what can happen. And you're right, again, having a vision, but being open to how things are going to transpire from that place. And we wouldn't know any of that unless we stayed in the game and we keep doing what we're doing. So I appreciate you. Matt, where can people find you and hang out with you? I know we've got the podcast and on Instagram. We've got an amazing community online too.
Yep. Fastest way at Matt Gottesman on Instagram because they'll find the links to everything else. mattgottesman.substack.com for all the writing. The Niche is You for the podcast. mattgottesman.com for access to everything else. We have a really cool creator community as well too, where we meet every single Monday. Basically, it's all about like, how are we constantly evolving our goals and our creativity and our execution? Where are we getting stuck? How are we correcting that? How are we using our network and our community to like get us past any of these obstacles and roadblocks we have? And now we're actually adding in extra workshops and like a book club. You have to read one book a month and we're going in and on it like at the end of each month now. We're constantly pushing these cool boundaries in our creator community. That can be found at Matt Gottesman in the Instagram.
All right. We will put all of this stuff in the show notes. Matt has a plethora of free resources you guys can download. He's always giving the house away. So be sure to join his text list for sure. You can get the latest episodes dropped right into your phone. I love that because it seems to be always what I need. It comes through. I had a great one I got to listen to this morning on my walk. So if you were looking for amazing perspective shifts in your life and wanting to connect deeper to the creative side of you, I'm encouraging you to join Matt's world one way or the other, whether it's just listening to the podcast or being a part of that text community that gets in the know. And then also reading a lot of the stuff on Substack. I love everything that you create, Matt. You're such a inspiration to me, along with a great wise teacher. And I'm grateful to know you. You have definitely crafted an unscripted path and are continuously, I think, leading the way in what is possible. The amount of passion behind what you do, it's contagious. So I appreciate you. And you guys go check out Matt's stuff. If you love this episode, give us a rating and review. It means the world to get this out to more people. It helps grow the show. This has been such a blessing to get to podcast with you, another podcaster who just gets it. So if you guys are wanting to get in the world of podcasting, let us know. Matt and I keep ideating on creating something for y'all. And so we just need a little validation that it might be exactly what you need.
Well said. Yeah, we're ideating. So let us know. We'd love to help other people figure this world out and make it just a lot less overwhelming.
Yeah, for sure. We'll see you guys on the next episode of Unscripted.
Bye, guys.